All right, the recording has started. So this is Willamette Week's endorsement meeting for Measure 26-217, which would authorize a new independent police oversight board. So I think to start, it'd be great if you could please explain to me overall, how is this going to improve upon IPR?
Well, actually, if IPR will go away once this measure is fully implemented. The independent police review was built under the premise that only police can review police misconduct. And what we know is that police rarely find police have done anything wrong. And therefore, discipline is not something that happens. What this measure will do is, for the very first time in Portland's history, after 30 years of community demands, will put in place a truly independent community oversight board with the ability to compel testimony, with the ability to have professional civilian investigators investigate complaints of police misconduct. In addition to that, it will also have the ability to recommend policy changes to the city council. It will also be able to actually implement discipline. IPR is, I was on the committee that Vera Katz put together in 2003 when the old PIAC board pretty much quit in frustration because they did not believe they had the power to hold police accountable for inappropriate behavior. IPR was developed by Gary Blackmer, who was the auditor at that time. And it was not based on what the majority of that task force wanted. It was based on the mayor, Vera Katz, saying to Gary Blackmer, take the majority report and a minority report and make something out of it. And IPR was born from that. It was supposedly going to be in place for a year, and then we would evaluate it. It was in place for 14 years before any analysis was done. And I can tell you, over the last 15 years of IPR, it has lost all credibility with the community. In many cases, they tell houseless people they will not investigate their complaints. They do not investigate complaints of racially disparate treatment. And prior to me being part of the coalition that brought the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division to Portland, they actually threw out 60% of the complaints they got in for very minor things like, well, they didn't know the officer's name. Well, as you know, it's almost impossible to get an officer's name unless they tell you what their name is. And so this new system is created under the premise that community members should hold community police officers accountable for their behavior.
So IPR, my understanding is that at the end of an investigation, all it can do is recommend a sustained finding. Why is it that this board would have the power to actually discipline and possibly terminate officers? Like, where does it get that authority from?
It will get that authority from both the charter and from changes that we will make both to arbitration. As you know, arbitration has been the biggest barrier to holding police accountable for misconduct. When we actually ever get to a place where we're going to fire a police officer, most of the time they go to arbitration and they get their job back. And the reason they get their job back is because we don't have a history of disciplining police officers for that behavior. And so your question again was, I'm sorry,
Well, yeah, I'm just wondering how this board would get the authority. I mean, it's my understanding that only the police chief, as it stands now, can terminate an officer. Why would the board be able to do that?
Yeah, it would be able to do it because we've written it into our charter, right? But we still have to change arbitration so that a community oversight board's decision is final. That's going to be an important part. And the People of Color Caucus in Salem has assured me that this will be a priority bill, whether they meet in December or whether they meet in a regular session in January. The Police Bureau has a lot of advisory boards, but none of them have power to do anything. None of them have the ability to actually have an impact on policy or on practices within the Police Bureau. And that's the frustration we're hearing today from both the IPR and, well, basically not IPR, but CRC, the Community Review Commission. they are absolutely frustrated that they don't have the authority to actually make any changes happen. And
Commissioner,
that goes
go
for
ahead.
just about every advisory board that's currently within the Portland Police Bureau. None of those have authority to actually enact changes.
Commissioner, I'm wondering if you're modeling this new, the new approach on something that you saw in another city, or is this entirely built from Portland, kind of your idea of best practices?
Well, we've actually talked to several states that have community oversight boards, Oakland being one. But we've talked to a lot of folks who have tried to put these pieces together to learn from their mistakes. And one of the big mistakes that I hear from my colleagues across the country is that if you don't have a dedicated budget, if the politicians don't like what you do, they actually reduce the budget, right? So that you don't have the resources to do the work that they need to do. In addition to that, we actually looked around the country at what are best practices around truly independent. And honestly, this will be the first of its kind. This will be a national model because we took what the failings have been in various community oversight boards across the country and decided that we would build one that would withstand some of the challenges that they've had. That's one reason why we want to put the framework in the charter, because as you know, political leadership changes, political will changes. But if it's in the charter, only the people of Portland can change it.
And is that why you chose to enshrine the budget for this in the charter?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're hearing loud and clear over the last 120 plus days, but actually over the last 30 years, that people really want to have confidence that community police officers are held accountable for their behavior. And so it's really important to put the framework into our charter. And the good news is in January, once this ballot measure passes, and we do believe it will pass overwhelmingly, once it passes, then the hard work really begins. Then we have to actually put a commission together to have conversations all over the city of Portland to make the other decisions. Like, how big is this oversight board, right? How do we make sure that it is representative of all the community members who are impacted by policing in our community? What are the terms for office, right? What do you do when you have to replace someone who for whatever reason can't continue their term, right? There's a lot more work to be done, but putting this into the Constitution really enshrines it into the laws in the city of Portland.
Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Hi, Mark.
Commissioner Hardesty, hi. I want to follow up on
hair.
I want to follow up on the question Nigel asked. At this moment, is there a city in America that has a police force that's being run in a way that we could look to? You know, let's say Willamette Week wanted to send a reporter to a city in America where the police force is being run in a way that you think is a paradigm. Is there one?
Yes, there is actually. Newark, New Jersey, believe it or not. Newark, New Jersey, you may remember, due to budgetary reasons, actually just had to disband their entire police force. And that was a few years back. But once they got their budget under control and decided to restart policing, they restarted it in a way that I hope Portland will emulate, right? And for example, you could go online and watch a video that I've watched many times that shows what de-escalation looks like when you really are concerned about everybody going home, right? Or wherever else they need to go. When I watched that video, and I've actually talked to some of the people within Newark Police Department, I mean, they went from being what's traditional policing, which is what everybody has around the country, to being intentional policing, right? And so in a de-escalation scenario, I saw this huge black man with this butcher knife, right, in the street, clearly in mental health distress. There were seven police officers that approached this man on the street in Newark. Only one police officer had a weapon drawn. Only one police officer was communicating with this gentleman, and he was communicating in a very calm, very concerned voice. What's going on, man? You look like you need help. What's going on? What's going on? I watched how these officers surrounded this gentleman to make sure that he didn't attack a civilian. The one police officer with his weapon drawn had that weapon focused on, if needing to, shooting that suspect with that huge butcher knife, right? The first time I saw that video, I thought that guy would have been dead in Portland in a New York minute, right? But this is good community policing, right? This is one person engaging the individual who's in distress in conversation, and not 20 police officers yelling conflicting demands at them, not yelling at someone in mental health distress, and not having a ton of weapons pointed at the individual, right? And by the way, the officer with the weapon, he had a revolver. He didn't have a shotgun. He had a revolver, and his job was to protect the officer that was in direct communication with the man. That's what I want to see in Portland. That's what I think de-escalation looks like. And I think today, Portland police officers' #1 objective is for them to go home. I want a police force where the objective is everybody goes home.
So I have two other quick questions, if I may, because I'm gonna have to duck out of this meeting first soon. A couple of weeks ago, we met with the mayor and we asked him why he didn't just turn over the police force to you.
Did he give you a good answer?
Well, he gave us several answers. I won't judge at this point whether they're good, but one of the things he did say, and I think Nigel was in the room so he can tell me if I'm wrong, is he said, I'm not so sure she'd accept it if I gave it to her. So that's my question. If the mayor called you today and said,
let me just say at the beginning, I said, I didn't need to have the police bureau, but what this last 120 plus days has shown me is that the police bureau needs direct, they need someone who's going to tell them what they can and cannot do, right? For example, I don't want police officers showing up at protests, period, right? So if he gave me the police bureau like I've asked for over the last 3 months, I would take it, absolutely.
Okay, thank you for selling that. My last question is, I'm hearing chatter that after the election, there's going to be talk to combine Multnomah County Sheriffs and the Portland Police. And I'm wondering if you've heard that and what do you think about it?
I've heard that, but that would take decades for that to actually happen. I have no, I think what the community is demanding is immediate action. They're not asking us to put a task force together, work 2 years to work through all the agreements that need to take place. Some point down the road, that might make sense. But honestly, I have less confidence in Multnomah County Sheriffs than I do in Portland Police Bureau. They are jailers by trade. And so I don't know if people are being treated with compassion and empathy and humanity in jails. So I don't think that would be an improvement at this point. I think first we have to improve policing, and then we can talk about, does it make sense to do any consolidations? But until we fundamentally change policing in this country, in this city, we're just moving the goalposts to somewhere else, which makes no sense.
So under this new oversight board, what would transparency look like in terms of investigations? Obviously with IPR, one of the problems is that because of Oregon state law, they can't publicize a lot of their findings. Would this new board be any different?
It would be a huge difference. The first thing is actually their meetings would be public. The community could participate and the community could observe, right? So that's a huge difference right there. Even if you're investigating some misconduct, we could set up a system whereby you're not using names, right? But you're using, a number, a letter. So because it will be a public board and they will meet in public, that's a huge difference from what IPR does now. I mean, every time the OIR group writes a report, they talk about the police review board, which is absolutely 5 police officers and a civilian. And it's totally the police voice totally outweighs the community's voice, right? But we pretend somehow the community is engaged because one person is on it. The CRC tells you today, they don't feel like they have power to hold police accountable. And so what we have is a pretend accountability system, right? that really doesn't serve the public's purpose at all.
I have to say, I'm a bit skeptical because I feel like you're naming a lot of positive changes that could happen. I don't understand why IPR doesn't just make these changes internally. Why do we have to get rid of that old system and create a totally new one to do that?
Well, one thing, IPR was created under the assumption that only police can investigate police. That's the problem. Today, IPR investigators review reports that the Internal Affairs Division does. And so that's not quite the same thing as actually conducting individual investigations. So you cannot never take a system built under the premise that only police can investigate police misconduct and then turn that into a community oversight system, right? We call a lot of things community oversight in the city of Portland that really don't have much community oversight at all. And so IPR could never be the system that I imagine us putting in place.
Commissioner Hardesty, good morning. It's Aaron.
Good morning, Aaron.
It's good to see you. How are you?
Likewise. Hey, I'm okay for 2020.
Yeah, same here. By the going standards, we're doing all right.
Yes.
So here's my question on IPR, and I have two actually, but I'll ask them one at a time so I'm not bombarding you.
All right, no worry.
First, sometime in the midsummer, we had Andrea Damewood write a guest piece for Willamette Week. She used to be an IPR investigator and left on good terms, but frustrated because she felt like the work she was doing was important, but ultimately proving fairly meaningless.
Yes.
And she identified two problems with the system that she saw it. One was that the standards that the officers were being judged on were not standards that matched community expectations. In other words, an officer could hit somebody upside the head with a baton, and almost anyone in our newsroom or in this city would respond with horror at that. Yeah. But in fact, the IPR would have to find that the officer acted within protocols because the protocols were different than what you and I would expect.
That's right.
That was her first problem. Her second problem was that that even if she found that the person did in fact violate protocols, that she couldn't actually tell anybody about it because the transparency was so oblique. The rules were so carefully constrained to protect the anonymity or kept the process in a closed box, essentially.
Yes, yes.
So those are the two things that she identified as being the failures of the system. And I'm curious if you could address how your proposal would rectify those two problems.
Again, I mean, the difference between having these kind of meetings in the public eye as compared to behind closed doors without the public being able to weigh in. I mean, a couple of years ago, probably more than a couple of years, probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, I actually went to a CRC meeting. And as you know, the police aren't even required to show up. So here they are under investigation. Here they are, a community member is challenging what the findings are, and the police aren't even required to show up. That's why it's important that this oversight board that we're going to put in place has the ability to compel testimony. That's key, right? Because if we can't get the officer to come and respond to the questions or the complaint, then it's a pretend oversight system. And so I absolutely agree with her. The other thing is, as you know, today, Portland Police Bureau writes the policy, which is kind of ludicrous in my mind that we would have the Police Bureau writing the policy that then they are held accountable to. And so if they're writing the policy, clearly they're going to write the policy in a way that actually makes sure whatever they do is within policy. And honestly, I don't believe that when you walk up on a community member, hit them with a baton in the head, push them down, and then hit them again, that is it within policy. If that's within policy, the policy desperately needs to be changed.
Well, and you mentioned my question. Well, this is my second. Speaking of people being hit in the head, I'm sure you're following with some interest the adventures of officer number 67.
Yes.
Who's been on our paper a few times now for not only shoving protesters to the pavement repeatedly. I think there are 3 people attending protests who have given detailed accounts. There are many more videos. all
Right.
showing an officer with the helmet number 67.
Right.
Maybe more troublingly, a black homeowner came out to complain that his house was flooded with tear gas, and an
Yes.
officer wearing the same helmet number took a
Yes.
baton to the back of his ear.
Yes, yes. And you know, I mean, I've seen all the community video that you've probably seen, and every time I see it, I'm just appalled that anybody would call that good policing tactics. When community members are running away from the police and they are chasing them and beating them with batons, that's not better than tear gassing people. And the fact that somehow that's within policy is very troubling.
Would the system that you're crafting reveal this officer's name?
Definitely. I mean, I think they would not. And again, the governance ordinance hasn't been developed yet. That will be the commission's work after this measure passes, right? But I anticipate that when someone has been when someone files a complaint about police misconduct, we will not announce their name at that time, right? Because nobody is guilty because somebody complains, right?
Right.
You're guilty because there's been a full investigation, and then you've come to a conclusion that this person is guilty. When they come to a conclusion that someone is guilty, I believe that they have an obligation to release the name of that officer. Yes, and I will be encouraging the commission to make sure as we put this piece together. I don't think it's fair for anyone to release names of people accused of misconduct, but I do think once they've been found out of policy and guilty, that those names should be public.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Those are my questions.
All right.
I'm still a little unclear on the transparency part.
Okay.
I just know that with IPR, like they're saying because of ORS 181.854 or whatever, they can't publicize the names of officers and they can't give these detailed accounts, or they have discretion to, but only in certain circumstances where there's a public like need to do so.
Right.
How does that square with what you're saying? Are you saying that they're not?
I'm saying that once we change the arbitration policy and once we change the Portland Police Association's union contract, that those issues will be resolved. Nothing that is stopping now being able to be transparent around community oversight is a barrier to us fully implementing this. Because again, we've got time, we've got 18 months after this measure passes to address any legislative issues and any union contract issues, right? I think if you were talking to Daryl Turner today, he would say this measure is illegal, right? Because it violates the collective bargaining agreement. And today he would be right. But by the time we set this commission, the challenges in the union contract and arbitration will be resolved.
Commissioner, you and I, you've talked a lot to me and to many others about the difficulty of negotiating that contract. And I know you have to be careful about what you can say about a contract, but it's not that easy, right? I mean, that's why we are where we are, because that Portland Police Association is very good at negotiating contracts. So what's going to change that's going to allow the city to essentially dictate terms?
Well, I mean, we are in a radically different environment than we've ever been in this country, in this city, right? I got to tell you, in my lived experience in the city of Portland, if you'd have told me that we could cut $27 million out of a police budget in one fell swoop, I'd have said, give me some of what you're drinking, because that's just not going to happen, right? For the first time in my lived experience, we have both the political will and the community will to make radical changes in policing, right? And as someone who's volunteered for 30 years as a community activist around police reform, it's kind of ironic that 30 years of work leads us to these moments in time. What will be different is when I first got to the city, I got a commitment from all my city council colleagues that we would hire an outside attorney, because I've been around long enough to watch how ineffective human resources has been in negotiating on behalf of the people. So we have an outside attorney. We've set aside $500,000 to make sure that that outside attorney leads our negotiations. The second thing that's radically different is for the very first time in the history of Portland, the entire city council is engaged in these contract talks. And we're being very clear and very deliberate. There are so many wacky things currently in the police union contract that you cannot trace back to one city council or another. And you say, who the heck would put this in a contract, right? The one that bugs me right now is the one that says elected leaders can't say anything that may cause embarrassment to a police officer. How do I know how 900 people get embarrassed, right? And who would put that into a union contract, right? Union contract, I am a union person through and through. My daddy was a longshoreman. I value unions. But when you have life and death decision-making capability in a community, a union contract should not protect you from accountability.
Thank you.
I just have a budget question now.
All right.
How did you arrive at that 5% number of the police bureau, and where is that money going to come from? Like, do you know what's going to be cut in lieu of this?
Again, we're talking 2 years down the road, right, when this will come about. But I am in the process now of actually making sure that we are rethinking what policing will be in this community. What we've heard over the last 120 days is that everybody doesn't experience policing the same way, right? And so what we know is that police really only have one job, and that job is to solve crime. And as of now, Portland police aren't that good at solving crime, right? But we call them out. They get called out when people are homeless. They get called out for people in mental health distress. They get called out for people who need wraparound social service supports, and they're not the experts. So that what we need to do is really limit their job to actually solving crime. And if we do that, what we need to replace what we've been using police for with is people who actually have the expertise that the community needs, right? So Portland Street Response is one of those new efforts to make sure that we are diverting people from having interactions with the police and actually providing Portland Street Response when it rolls out in January or February, assuming that we don't have another pandemic overload. We'll have a qualified mental health professional, a firefighter/EMT, and a peer supporter. Because when I went and talked to houseless community members, business owners, neighborhood associations, these are the things that people said we needed. And they didn't say that what they needed were police officers to come and just arrest people because they were houseless, right? And so the more I think the community is able to see an alternative to police, the less likely people will want to be calling the police to solve community social issues. And let me also say the police have done an excellent job. I mean, their marketing strategy is brilliant, right? All of a sudden they can't do anything because $15 million was cut out of their budget and $12 million is supposed to be cut because of the 5.7% cut across the board in all city bureaus. So they can't do anything now because they lost $15 million. They still have $223 million in their budget. And so it's disingenuous to continue to use the cut in their budget as an excuse for them not doing their job.
I think I'm good with questions, Nigel, if you have any more.
No, I think you've answered our questions, Commissioner. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm so sorry, Darren. I was sure they had questions about the campaign, and here you are, and you're just being handsome, and they're just waiting.
You know, Commissioner, every time we get on these calls, I have to let you know I don't fully prepare to present because you just kill it every time. So I haven't been wrong about that once. So thank you for your leadership in this as well. And thank you all for having us. And yeah,
Pleasure. All right, have a great weekend, everybody.
You guys too. Bye-bye. And by the way, when are your endorsements coming out?
Wednesday.
Yay.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. See ya. Bye.
Okay. See you then. Bye-bye.